then that's great. Super. Well, thank you so much for joining us. As Sammy has said, it's wonderful to see you. I'm Sarah Holmes from Liverpool Hope University. And just to very briefly, as Sammy said, this is a joint project between all of these organisations here on the screen. And so we wanted to know, we gathered together back in September last year to find out, we said, you know, we're very aware that there's fewer families attending church in these post-lockdown times. And so we wanted to dig into this and find out and listen to families, listen to churches to see what was going on. So we carried out this online survey. As you see here on the screen, there were 175 church leaders responded from a wide range of denominations, and 209 parents of children aged 0 to 16. And so we were very, had a couple of wonderful research assistants who really dug into the data. Emma's here tonight as well. She spent many hours reading the responses. And the full report of that is going to be available in very early September. But we wanted to share with you some of our key findings tonight, and also hopefully lots and lots of very practical ideas to share with you. Now, Anne Caston, who is also part of the research team from Canterbury Christ Church University, couldn't be here tonight, but she's recorded for us her segment. So I'm going to play that for you now. This is the beginning of some of the key research findings that came out of the research. So I'll share this now. Oh. Okay, sorry. Okay, it's not working. Never mind. I can talk about them anyway. So when we did the research, some of the key findings that came out were that families and churches were thinking different things, really. So we had many clashes in terms of the data. So in some senses, we had church leaders saying, well, we're doing lots and lots of activities, resources, and that sort of thing. And this is what we're doing to help families. And on the other side, we had families who were saying, we feel that we're not really getting support from the church. And so we've kind of picked up, there's a bit of a disconnect going on there. What was really, really exciting was that churches and parents both said the same thing. They wanted, I think it was 99% of both groups wanted to be working in partnership. So neither group was saying we are the sole people who should be nurturing a child's faith, but there was very much this sense of working in partnership together. And so that was really exciting for us to see. But yet we were hearing a lot of things from churches about we're not quite sure why families are not returning. One of the statistics here, a quarter of church leaders said they didn't know if the families in their church had felt supported in terms of nurturing faith in the home. And this was kind of a surprise for us, really. And so what we wanted to do was to encourage a lot more talking about this, because the biggest thing that came through in terms of what Christian parents found most beneficial and most helpful was relationships. In fact, there was only 2% of families who found it helpful having worksheets and activities and those sort of doorstep packs and so on. What they overwhelmingly found most beneficial were relationships and talking. And so as we read through all of the many responses from both groups, it was clear that encouraging talking was really valuable. And so hence what we're doing this evening, encouraging talking about families and faith. So I'm going to hand over to Andy now to talk about how can we develop those partnerships with parents in the local church.
My name's Andy. I work for a charity called Share Jesus, but also for the Kitchen Table Project as well. And in my 20s, I think I thought I had children's work nailed. I did children's work in my local church, and every week the kids left with a smile upon their face. They learned something new about God. But as I reflected upon that the last number of years, I actually realised how much I marginalised the role that parents play. And this research from the last 2 years just shows how important parents are in nurturing faith in the home. So there are kind of three important things. The first thing is, as we're planning what we might do for children, as we're planning what we might do for families, is to really understand what are the needs of families and children in our churches. What are the questions they're wrestling with themselves? What are they learning about at school? What are some of the things they're discovering as they look at the Bible, perhaps at home? That actually the program we do as a church is really understand what are the needs of the people in our church community. And I think it's about creating space for real honest conversation too. My daughter's very polite. When her kids worker asks, how are you finding it? She'll always say, oh, it's great, thank you very much. But when I get home from after church, often she says to me, actually, it's a bit too babyish at certain points. But being able to feed that back in the right format is really important. As a church recently, we hosted a kind of Zoom call with parents to explore what were their needs, what were their questions, what were the things that kids were grappling with, and how can we best serve their needs and understand where they're at. So the first thing is regarding planning. How do we plan our families and children's work to really help families excel at this time? The second thing is about springboarding. That how can we springboard from the things that we do corporately to really empower families in the home? Often I think we talk about what happens on a Sunday morning, perhaps in the 1 hour or the 45 minutes with the kids, but how can that be a springboard into what is possible during the week? One really practical thing I think on the back of this has been the idea of creating 4 or 5 action points of things that families can do when they get home. It could be perhaps having a conversation, or it could be an activity, an arty activity, or it could be exploring the Bible together. But the idea being that what happens as we gather becomes a springboard into conversations in the home during the week ahead. And the third thing is about prayer. Actually, we often say prayer is so important, but how are we really praying for our children and praying for our families? Again, it's about understanding what are the prayer requests for families. What are they wrestling with? What are they struggling with? What are their kids going through, perhaps at nursery and at school? How can we best be praying for them in this season? The idea of planning, of springboarding, and of praying. And of course, the secret to all of this is how are we communicating with families? How are we communicating with parents? I mentioned a moment ago, we've done a Zoom call recently. And I think Zoom calls can be a really important way that actually you haven't got to leave the house, but for half an hour, you can invite parents to have a dialogue about what is working and what could be improved as we're serving them and their children. Maybe it's about having a WhatsApp kind of group where you can share different things through the week. Perhaps it's about purposely and intentionally calling parents one-on-one, saying, can I chat with you one-on-one, perhaps for a coffee or over the phone, just to really understand what you're going through in this season. How best can we support you in the days, weeks, and months ahead? It's important to remember that parents are busy people. There's always piles of laundry. There's always loads of washing up to do and some kind of lost piece of school uniform. But amongst all this calamity, parents do want to engage. It's about giving them the different ways and means of having that conversation, that we can be planning with them in mind, springboarding for them into the week ahead, actually praying for them and their children as well. So Anna, over to you. What works well when we have conversations about faith?
Thank you. My name's Anna Hawkin. I work for Parenting for Faith, which is a ministry of the charity BRF. And they just asked me to share really briefly what happens when we get families talking about faith at home. We've said we want to get them talking, but why? Well, there's 3 things I think happen. Firstly, it makes it normal. It makes faith and talking about faith something that is just part of the everyday. It's not taboo. It's not something they need to be confused about or worried about or just not sure how to bring up. I think we can, it's particularly a British problem, but some other things as well that we can say, oh, you know, I love God, he's amazing, I have a relationship with him, but you're not going to get to see any of what that looks like because I do it privately behind closed doors or when you're asleep or when you're at school. And at Parenting for Faith, we're really encouraging people to say, make it a normal part of the everyday. You're not just a Christian at church, you're not just a Christian on Sundays. So how does it affect what you do in the everyday? So when we talk about faith at home, it makes it normal. Secondly, it makes it real and relevant. Parents and carers are the most significant influence on their children and their teenagers. I know it's harder to see with the teenagers, but there's lots of research that shows teenagers are still watching and listening. Children get to see for themselves what a relationship with God looks like from the people that know them best and the people that they spend the most time with. There is so much time at home. I know it doesn't feel like it because there's so much stuff to cram in, but it's all the little bits. It's the getting ready for school. It's the dropping them at clubs and picking them up. It's the chat when they get in late at night or not late at night, depending on their age. So it makes it real and relevant. It makes it about what is happening right here, right now. So the third thing is that it makes it actually happen. We all want children and young people to be talking about faith. And sometimes they're going to be in the mood for that at a youth group or after school club or Sunday services. And sometimes they're not. For whatever reason, they've got out of bed the wrong side, or they don't like the activity or whatever. But actually, there are so many opportunities to talk about faith in the normal, in the everyday, when you're sat next to a toddler on the potty, when you're taxiing a teenager late at night, when there's been friendship drama at school again, and they're really upset. Those are the moments to dig in and say, hey, God's got something to say about this as well. He's here, he's with you. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about where he is and what this looks like. I'm going to hand back to Sarah now, I think.
Great, thanks, Anna. It's such a joy to be working with all these wonderful people with so much experience and insight. One of the things that we're sort of proposing to you is to take July as a month for talking about this kind of thing even more than normal in your churches. And so hopefully you've had the handouts in the email that you can use tonight to fill in the little gaps and so on, but also various ideas that you can use to get the conversations going in churches in July and onwards, of course. So that's just to kind of drop that in as an idea. So I was just going to talk a little bit more now about some more of the research findings. One of the things that came through, I've mentioned already, a quarter of church leaders said they didn't know whether families in their church felt supported in terms of faith at home. And we also asked then, okay, so what is helpful? So I'm just going to talk for a few moments now about some of the things that were helpful. There we go. So dialogue with parents. I think this is the biggest thing here. Hence why we're saying, let's talk about families and faith. Because as it says there, some church leaders didn't know how church engagement had been impacted or how faith at home had been affected or supported or not supported. And so we really want to try and encourage dialogue with parents. A lot of what Anna and Andy have already been talking about in terms of partnership and empowering and working together. And so some churches had responded by providing training for parents. Some had signposted resources, but many parents said that this had felt a little bit too much at times, perhaps felt a little bit bombarded, a bit overwhelmed, and actually would find specific support sort of embedded in a relationship to be much more beneficial. So perhaps helping parents to say, oh, here's one really good website that I found really helpful, or here's one idea that you could use this week. So trying to really know the families that we're working with so that we can give them specific ideas and help, and listening as well as part of that dialogue. So it's a two-way partnership. The other thing was in terms of resourcing. So, how can churches support families? Well, 46% of parents said that it was relationships that was most beneficial part of church during the pandemic, versus 2% who found worksheets and activities beneficial, which I know many churches spent hours preparing all of these activity packs and resource packs and so on. Now, I think that possibly the relationships and conversations that happened when they were delivered were very meaningful and beneficial, but the actual activities and resources themselves were less useful. But it's the relational sort of side. So what we wanted to be encouraging you is, in these times when everyone's really weary and exhausted and kind of struggling to just get back to some sort of normality, actually to focus on relationships. Relationship building seems to be what's really treasured and valued by parents. And then in terms of resourcing, I've already mentioned this sense of both sides wanting to partner together. And so we're going to talk in a few moments about this, but it was so exciting to see that 88% want the church to provide those resources in terms of how to support faith in the home. So they were some more of the key findings, and I'm going to hand over now to Rachel to talk a bit more about why talking is so beneficial.
Fabulous, thank you. So we also did a different partnerships. One of them, we did some research called Talking Jesus that is also just out, and we thought there was some real synergy. So we wanted to share a few of those stats with you now. So I'm going to just share my screen. Fabulous. And I'm going to share that with you all, and we're going to have a little look at just a few stats. So this research was done just at the beginning of this year. It's called Talking Jesus. And the clue is in the name, and that's why we thought it would go with what we're doing today. And some of the things we did a big sample of 3,115 UK adults. We also did an oversample of just over 900 practicing Christians. And those in particular, what I want you to see, because I think you're going to find these statistics really helpful to emphasize what about your ministry. Look at this slide. We asked, what age do practicing Christians come to faith? So we asked these practicing Christians when they said they came to faith. 33% of them said they came to faith from birth. It's their earliest memories, if you like. It's right from the beginning of their lives. And then can you see where all the other majority of people are coming to faith? It's pretty obvious from the slide. Most people are coming to faith by the age of 18. Now, if this is not a clear signal to the church about resourcing our work with children, young people, families, I don't know what is. So many of the decisions that people are making about whether or not they are going to be a follower of Jesus Christ are happening in these incredibly important years up to 18. And that's why all the work that Sarah and everyone else in this partnership has done is so important, because we need to help families realise how important it is. This slide does that, and then empower them to know what might help. So that's the first slide. You can even see what's happening with the 0 to 4s there as well. Then we asked everybody how they came to faith, and you can, you can see here, if you've got us over the top of it, just move us over. You can see here that 34% of those of us who are practicing Christians, people could pick more than one influence. So if we pick 2 or 3 influences, said that growing up in a Christian family was the #1 influence on helping people to come to faith. Growing up in a Christian family is the #1 influence on helping people to grow up in the Christian faith, which is staggering and just so important for us to hear this evening. So everything we're talking about here, whether you are a church leader, whether you have children, whatever, it's saying this is so important for church growth. You can see some of the other things there. Reading the Bible comes out really importantly. And then can you see conversations with a Christian you knew well come out really importantly, around 15%. So these are the top things that influence people for faith. And one of those is talking with people. It's really obvious, really, isn't it? So growing up in a Christian family, talking with people, really important. These are a few of the others that drop in. There's church school, youth club, Sunday school, other things in there, but they're not as crucial as the big one, which is talking and having conversations about our faith and growing up in a Christian family, and knowing that it's the under 18 age bracket where so much of the decisions for faith are being made, which, if you like, just puts a highlight on everything that this team have done. Other people do come to faith right across the generation, so that's exciting. But if you like, what I'm doing is saying this is just really, really important. So conversations and family, where they collide, how do we make this happen best? How is it possible to include all ages in talking about faith? I'm handing over back to Anna.
Hi, back again. Yeah, so this is the question we were asked. Is it possible to include all ages in talking about faith? No, I don't think it's possible. I think it's essential. You know, from what we've just heard from Rachel there, those children who've grown up in Christian families, it's not by virtue of them plopping into a Christian family that suddenly makes them a Christian. It's all the conversations that those families have, the things that happen, all the things that are part of being a Christian family. And you are never too young or too old, for that matter, to talk about faith and to engage in conversations and to be aware of spirituality. And I think we can quite easily accidentally fall into a trap of thinking people are too young or too old, or they have additional needs, and that makes it more challenging. But everybody has a spiritual part of them. Everyone has a way of recognizing that there's something greater than themselves. And what we need to do is think about ways to help people express that and help people engage with it. Now, I'd love to see a show of hands. You can use your actual hand or your Zoom hand. But how many of you have had a child, your own or someone else's, say something and you've thought, gosh, I had no idea you'd heard that and understood it? It could be something you've said and you didn't know. It could be something on YouTube, could be something on the TV. Yeah, good. I'm seeing lots of hands. So it's not just me. That's encouraging. Because I think sometimes we can think, oh, you know, once they can read and write, maybe they can engage a bit more. Once they can articulate themselves a bit better. But as a parent and as someone who's worked in churches, I just think children hear and understand and process so much more than we realize. And it's just about thinking about how can we engage them in those conversations? How can we make it easier for them? And so conversations aren't just about talking. I've got hundreds of hands scrolling now. It's all right, you put your hands down. I've got these conversations don't just need to be verbal, okay? We can be writing things, we can be drawing things, we can make stuff out of Play-Doh, we can point at things, we can show a face of how something makes us feel, we can show a face to another person, we can show a face to God, we can point to pictures. Dr. Rebecca Nye, I know many of you will be familiar with her work on children's spirituality, but she points out that in younger children, verbally isn't the main way that they communicate. And we need to be looking at their art, at their play, at their movement. These are all ways that they express spirituality. Because when we get different generations engaging in these conversations, it is so helpful. People get to see the whole range of what it looks like to have a relationship with God, not just what it looks like in the later years or in the younger years or the ones in between. It gives a much broader range and a much broader view, which is just so helpful. And Dr. Nye, as I mentioned before, she did some research on 6 to 11-year-olds. And she found that all of them, whether they were from a Christian home or not, had a sense of a deeper sort of sensing that there was a deeper purpose and kind of spirituality. They used different words for it. But they thought that it was something just for children because they never heard grown-ups talk about it. They thought it was something that they'd grow out of. Guys, we're doing them a disservice if that's what's happening. God is amazing. He changes lives. He changes our lives. So let's encourage conversations where we're sharing that and talking to our children and young people about it. And let's make them two-way conversations, not interrogations, not answer the question, what did you learn? What's in the Bible passage? But let's share honestly and openly. We need to be ready to share as well. We need to put our phones down to do that. We need to think honestly about our answers. But yeah, let's open that up and see where it goes. So I'm going to hand over to Claire now and just ask her really, what can we do during services, so Sunday services, to help families feel equipped and valued and included?
Thanks, Anna. I'm Claire Burson and I'm from Care for the Family. I work on the Kitchen Table Project. And I think that phrase, isn't it, that you've just asked me there, Anna, you know, how can we help parents feel valued, included and equipped? And I think, you know, the research shows parents want to know that the church is there to support them and is there to value them and behind them. So I think one of the things that we can do in our church services as church leaders is talk about the role of the parents have in discipling their children in the terms of ministry. You know, we'll often invest in loads of different areas of ministry within our churches. But what is it that we are doing to recognize that parents, this is your ministry, this is your discipling this next generation, and what can we do to support you? And as we recognize that from the fronts of our churches, as we encourage our congregations maybe to pray for parents and carers, you know, we encourage that from the front. It helps the whole church to recognize the value of parents and carers in their role and to come alongside and to support them. But it also affirms the parents. It helps the parents to feel valued, that they have an important role, and that we as church leaders, as church congregations, as the family of God, recognize that in them. So how can we include them then? In our Sunday services, how can we include families? There are lots of ways that we can. I think one of the ways is include them in serving together. You know, encourage our families to maybe be involved on the welcome team, or lots of our children and young people will be very au fait with sound and technology, way more than us, and social media. You know, are there ways that we can encourage our families, our children, our young people to be involved in the actual service? Could be praying, could be helping with communion. I heard one church recently where the minister asks the children to bring the different emblems for communion to the front, and then he takes over from there. But, you know, they have a part to play in that really important role, and it just has helped the children to just feel connected and to feel valued. If we have children's provisions in our churches, how often do we pray for the children and the children's workers as they leave the service? You know, I think lots of us will do that. But what about asking the children as they leave to pray for us as a congregation? You know, not so you include them in that two-way. And then how about inviting them back into the service, maybe at the end of the children's provision, maybe to share what they've been doing. Only a few weeks ago, we could hear our children in their Sunday school class singing their hearts out to one of the songs that we sing as a corporate worship. And we invited them to come back in and to sing that over the congregation at the end, you know, and I just loved watching all the older people at the end of the service, you know, just encouraging the children and just thanking the children for that moment of like prayer and blessing and worship. So there are ways that we can actually include our children in those services. You know, if you have all age services, you know, that's a great way as well to encourage those intergenerational relationships and connections. The research is saying families want those relationships. But just looking at feeling equipped as well, that came up in that question that Anna's just asked me. Maybe we provide moments in the services for parents to actually stop and to talk to their children about what's going on. You know, Parenting for Faith often refer to it as framing. How can we show our children what it is we're doing? Because sometimes we just assume they understand. But can we say, we're just going to take a moment now. Families, if you've got your children here, maybe explain this next part of the service, why it is we're taking communion, why it is that we're worshipping here together. And as we encourage parents to have those conversations in the service, hopefully those conversations will carry on in their homes as well. I think encourage parents to talk, to share at the front, even through now the month of July. Let's get parents talking. Let's get parents talking maybe at the front and sharing simple things they've been doing in everyday life to nurture faith. And as one parent shares and one family comes out, the children as well and shares, that'll just encourage those peer conversations. And for those of us who are church leaders with young children ourselves right now, you know, let's share those ideas. Let's make it normal. Let's talk about it from the front. When we were going to the park the other day, we talked about God here. When we were having a crazy bath time, we talked about God, and just normalizing it, as Anna talked about earlier, normalizing those everyday conversations and opportunities to share faith. Brilliant. Okay, so I'm just going to hand over now to Emma. She's going to tell us a little bit about how the research findings actually apply specifically to the under fives. Thanks very much, Emma.
Hello, yes, thank you, Claire. So I'm Emma. I was involved in actually looking at all the research. And so I got the privilege of reading through all of the surveys and going through and working out what people were saying and how it was coming up and stuff. And particularly I've then since then been looking into the under fives because, as Anna was saying earlier, it's often an age that people kind of think, oh, we'll deal with that later. We'll kind of look after them and love them really well, but then we'll input into their spiritual lives as they grow. And so we were just interested to see what parents thought and what church leaders thought about this age group. And so I thought there's loads of stuff in there, but I thought something that would be useful to share would be, we asked the parents and carers how they would like to be supported by their church and by the Christian community more broadly over the next year. And so I thought I'd share those 4 points with you. So we can largely kind of group, these were just some of the key themes that came out. So firstly, parents and carers of under fives were specifically asking for training and resources for faith at home, for sharing faith in the everyday moments of their lives, as we were just talking, for how to have conversations about certain topics, how to implement rhythms and routines in their lives that supported their faith. And yeah, parents really want specific help on this. They mentioned a whole load of things, from like parent retreat days, online small group like discussion, to courses, book clubs, all sorts of different ways, I guess, that we could do that. But ultimately they were asking for specific training and resources on that. So I guess be encouraged that our under 5 parents do really want that. And then secondly, there was a lot in the research about how people just wanted to feel supported and cared for and contacted. Numerous times people would talk about how great it was when someone reached out to them from the church and gave them a phone call or got in touch, but also how sad it made them when people didn't do that, and how easily they felt forgotten. So I think that's a really easy one. A lot of people mention remembering names, learning names of their kids, and that people in the congregation know what's going on in their lives and what their kids like and don't like, and that element of I guess being part of a church family but being really known and valued. Here we've got events for parents and the whole family. So again, parents were asking for time to be together with other families, with other members of the church, where they're all together. And a lot of these were just social, a lot of just relational building, time to hang out, time for really deep conversation. Lots of people talk about wanting to share the things they're struggling with other people from church. And so making space to just get to know one another, chat, and have those kind of conversations. And finally, for anyone that is involved in Sunday mornings and content wise, a lot of stuff came out in the research about parents wanting really good spiritual basis for their under 5s groups on a Sunday. And I know from experience that volunteers is a hard, thing to fight, and it's not easy to resource all these different groups. But anyway, if you are doing some kind of group on a Sunday, people mentioned wanting it not to just be a place where kids are kind of looked after and play with toys, but where they can really do some kind of age appropriate spiritual content too. So I hope that has helpful. But we've been talking a lot about how we need to listen and how we need to talk with the families in our context to learn from them what they need. And I think I'm going to hand over to Sammy now, if her microphone is still working, who's going to talk to us a bit about listening and how we can listen well to our families.
Thank you, Emma. So we've heard from the research that relationships are important, conversations are important, and we've heard some ways to get people talking. I'm going to pick up a little bit on what Andy shared with us earlier on about how we can listen. So this is one of my kind of loves. I used to lead work with a church, both with church families and schools and in a community. And over 3 years, we grew 48% on a Sunday and 58% in the week in terms of our reach with families, because we intentionally spent a year listening. And I want to give you 3 ways to listen. The first is listen with, then we're going to do listen big, and then listen deep. So listen with, I don't know about you, but if somebody sits down in front of me and says, tell me about, you kind of clam up a bit, the brain goes to mush. It's a little bit intimidating. So think about the perspective and the position that you're listening from. How can you come alongside parents? How can you immerse yourselves in parents' day to day so that you're listening with them, not to them? So maybe the school gates, maybe the side of a sports field, maybe a toddler group or at the swimming pool. If you don't mix with parents, maybe you know some friendly parents who do. It could be social media, but kind of listening with is how you listen when they don't think you're listening, but you're just immersed in their world and alongside them, so you get a sense of what the challenges and what the opportunities are. The second is listen big. Now, this might not be for everybody. It can be a bit of a rabbit hole. It's a rabbit hole that I actually love. And you might discover you do too. So kind of suspend disbelief. But when the government run their census, all the data is then managed by, you call Mosaic and Experian. And you can look up, if you want all the detail, it costs a lot of money, thousands of pounds. But if you want the top level of detail, then you can look it up on the web. And so to listen big, I knew my church's postcode and I would put into Mosaic kind of 10, 20, 30 postcodes of streets round and about where the church was to find out who lives there. because the way Mosaic and Experian categorize families, there's lots of different types of families. And I was able to use the data to work out actually who lives around the church, who am I trying to connect with, what's life like for them. And even though there are different types of families, the demography is different, you can spot patterns, things that they all have in common. And then they become your opportunities when you're trying to reach the community for mission. What I used to do was link the things that they had in common with the seasonal aisle of the supermarket, something that was in parents' psyche already. Because when I did this, my biggest take home was that families are stuck on eat, work, sleep, repeat. Eat, work, sleep, repeat. And that comes with a lot of guilt, the guilt of busyness and not being there for children. And what they want is quality family experiences. If you love Experian and Mosaic and you like going down that rabbit hole, there are a couple of other websites that you can look at as well. One's called NoMiss, the other is DataShine, and then the Church of England use something called ArcGIS. So it's broad stereotypes and grouping, but it's really useful to give you a sense of that bigger picture and who you're trying to reach. Last is listen deep. So what I did was, over a course of a year, what Andy said earlier, I had one-to-one conversations with my families. I looked at which families come 3 or 4 times a month, who comes once a month, who comes less than that. And I would set aside an hour, sometimes at the swimming pool, but often over a cup of coffee, to have a proper conversation with those families. Why do they come to church? Do they think they're growing in their faith? What helps them? What are the challenges? And then what you do is you distill all those 3 types of listening together, and you look for the patterns and the traits that emerge. But my whole strategy and approach with the team I ran was based on what we heard from parents, that listening then formed our response. It was a response to actual need rather than perceived need. Now, if this was yesterday, I'd be saying, Rachel, Heifer, Evangelical Alliance, how can we create a sense of a village to raise a child? But Rachel is actually with her child this evening. So, but has very kindly sent me her notes, and I'm going to draw on those. So how can we create a community around our children, whether it's a messy church community, a toddler group community, a school community, or a Sunday community? And Rachel suggested 3 things, 3 cultures that we can develop. And these pick up on what Claire said a little bit earlier when she was talking about intergenerational approaches. So we're going to think quickly about a culture that values children and young people, a culture of welcome, trust and relationship, and a culture of discipleship. So picking up on what Claire said, a culture that values children and young people says actually the Holy Spirit doesn't distinguish by age. Children are not the church of tomorrow. Children and young people are the church of today. So how can we make them a visible presence and a valued presence? They could be on our welcome teams, our coffee teams, our AV and sound teams. We can get them at the front, helping with the notices. I always used to get young people helping me lead a service if I was leading. I've also had it where we train families. I know Parenting for Faith are really good at this. You train families in how to do prayer ministry as a family. But how can we show in a very visible way that we value children and young people by including them and making them visible from a very early age? Developing a culture of welcome, trust and relationship is really about developing compassion and empathy for our families when they turn up late on a Sunday morning, because it's been a real struggle to get out of door and get everybody's coats on and get breakfasted, when they seem a little bit frazzled, when the children misbehave. It's just having that sense check to remember that parenting is hard. Parents feel tired, harassed and guilty, and we want all of that guilt to melt away at the door. We want a culture of welcome, of trust, of empathy. We know how it feels. I used to offer breakfast before my services on a Sunday morning because it was just then one less battle for parents to have. And then the last one, a culture of discipleship. This idea of, creating a whole church culture of fostering and prayerfulness towards our children and young people. Again, Parenting for Faith offer really valuable resources on this, with Nurturing Your Child's Faith and their Kids in Leadership agenda. Mark Griffiths, who some of you might know from St Paddens in Wales and New Wine, he uses the Jewish language of Behith and Mishpor Kor. The Behith is the kind of tight-knit family, and the Mishpor Kor is the wider Jewish community. And he has a vision for our children getting their Mishpor Kor, that wider family, from their church, a network in our churches of older adults, obviously following safeguarding procedures, but who are interested in our children and young people's lives, who are praying for them. They might be trained to mentor them. I know particularly when you get to the teenage years, it's really important to have other significant adults speaking into our children's lives who are not parents. Children just listen better in the teenage years sometimes to people who are not their parents. So how can we involve the whole church community in nurturing our children's faith? So we're now going to move on. I think it's going to be either to Andy or to Claire, who are going to signpost us to some helpful resources that will help us do all the things that we've been talking about this evening.
Thanks very much, Sammy. Yes, you will all have received a handout when you booked in, which will highlight and signpost you to a lot of amazing resources. There's resources on there from Parenting for Faith, Kitchen Table Project, there's Godventure, and there's lots of other resources out there. But I think right at the beginning, when Sarah was talking about the research, you know, parents are saying, thank you for sending us resources, but please stop bombarding us with it. Because any parent can do, you know, type in Google family resources and have a load of resources. But it's how we use those resources wisely. So yes, great to signpost to resources, but let's maybe think about how we can target resources. So if there is a theme going on in your church for a particular month, is there a resource that you might look for, you might find? So it might mean a bit of work on your part, but you find this resource and then you provide that to families. Maybe set up a WhatsApp group, maybe gather parents together online, in person, but to talk about that resource and to share ideas of how you could use it, get other parents to think of ideas, what might work in their context, what might not work, but almost target resources rather than just that blanket of resources. So that's, you know, one of the things that has definitely come out of the research. But yeah, get parents talking together, peers sharing ideas. But WhatsApp is a great easy way to do that, isn't it? And you encourage parents to share, you post a resource, you encourage parents to share their ideas on there and generate conversations, get them talking. Thanks very much. And back over to Sarah now, I think.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much, Claire. So hopefully this has whetted your appetite for what sorts of conversations you could really get going. As I said, we really want to encourage in churches during July, particularly in those months, this month. Usually the weather might be a bit better. I don't know how it will be, but perhaps it's an opportunity to have a bit less program, a bit less activity going on, and we can just relax slightly and have more time relationally. And so in that handout, we've got various opportunities and ideas of how you can talk with your church leadership team, talk within the church services, talk with parents talking to each other, talk with children at all the different layers, talking about faith, which is great. And also, just to mention, we're really keen to kind of track the impact of these kind of changes in churches. The thing is, I love researching. I love hearing people's stories. And sometimes those stories are really encouraging and inspiring. And sometimes they're quite sad and difficult. But actually, if we can collect these stories together and share them with church leaders and the Christian community, we can better serve families. So we're going to be sending out a very mini, I think it's a 1-question survey after this webinar to say what kind of how has it helped you in your context? And then actually we'll send it out again in a month and maybe in a few more months to just find out what kind of impact this has perhaps had in your setting, to try and work out what has been helpful, so that various organisations on this call and other organisations can know what exactly is helpful, and then we can focus our attention more onto those. So also, if you are wanting to do this more in your church during July, the wonderful Kitchen Table Project are going to send out some information every week, just a few little ideas that you can share with your context. So hopefully that will be helpful. So we'll send out an email to you all about that. Feel free to email me back and say if you don't want to be involved, and we can stop emailing you there. But I'm going to hand over to Andy now to officially close our time, draw it to a close. Sorry we're a few minutes late starting. That was because we're having a little technical issue. But then what we'll do is we'll stay on the call for perhaps 10-15 minutes and answer some of those questions that have been coming through Slido or on the chat as well. So if you're able to hang around, you can, but if you need to dash off, then once Andy's prayed, do feel free. So I'll hand over to Andy.
Cool, let's just be quiet for a minute right now. Father God, I've heard so much content and so many ideas and so many possibilities. But right now, God, we ask you just to put on our hearts just the one thing you're calling us to do to push this conversation forwards. We thank you so much for the families that are part of our churches. Thank you for those kids. And God, we long for them to come to know you personally, to discover what it is to be in a relationship with you. So, Father God, help us to listen well. Help us to really understand the needs of parents and families. Help us to understand the needs of carers and adolescents and the next generation. And God, may you give us the wisdom to do the right things at the right time, to really help to nurture conversations in church, but also conversations at home as well. We thank you that your church isn't an organization, but it's a family we get to belong to. Empower us by your Spirit, we pray. In the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. As I say, if you need to go, then feel free. Hopefully that's been helpful. But if you're able to hang on for another 10 or 15 minutes, we'll respond to some of these questions. Now, Sammy, I think, is tracking the Slido link. Oh, sorry, I've just done that. But one question, Sammy, which came up in the chat, I noticed, was about those websites you mentioned that were helpful for seeing data and so on. Would you mind just explaining a little bit or signposting those, please?
Yeah, no, I can definitely do that. We've only had one question so far in the Slido. So whilst I put up the websites, I won't put the full URL, but I'll put the names. And if you put them into Google, it will take you to them. Then maybe people would like to think of their questions in Slido.
Super. Feel free, anybody, if you want to type in the chat now or into Slido, or that would be great if there's anything specific. Great. Seems like we've answered lots of questions, hopefully, so that's good. Here we go. What's this here? Faith at home when only one parent is a Christian. Anna, just to pick you out there, do you fancy talking on that one at all?
I sensed you were going to do that. I was hitting unmute. It's all good. Yeah, this is something that comes up a lot. Either one parent is a Christian, or different faiths, or separated families, like with different views. And one of the ways we kind of approach it at Parenting for Faith is to encourage parents to share their own faith experience. So we call it creating windows, but it just means making a little bit of your own relationship with God so that your child can see or hear it. And then framing, Claire was talking a bit about that, just explaining to them what that looks like, or not. It might just be letting them see and making it up for themselves. But generally, we find that tends to not cause conflict and tension with the parent who isn't a Christian or who's from a different faith, because it becomes less about, okay, child, here is what you should believe, or, this is what this family thinks, or this is kind of a set of rules, or the way that the world is. All that you're doing is sharing what has been helpful to you and how you live your life. And you do that with all sorts of things. You share what food you eat and what you watch and how you live your life. Our children learn so much from that. And we just really encourage people to treat faith in the same way, and to just make it so that your children can see and hear a little bit more of what that looks like. So it might be praying out loud instead of your head. It might be showing them that you're on a Bible app rather than just scrolling social media. It might be mentioning that while they're at school or they were asleep, you prayed with a friend, or you had some worship music on. Tiny things, tiny little tweaks. And that works for everyone, but it works particularly well in that context where just one parent is Christian.
That's helpful, thanks. Now, Leo's pointed something out that I actually noticed as well when we were talking. I think Emma and I both used the word resource slightly differently. So well spotted, Leo. You get a prize for that. But I think, sorry, just to repeat the question for the benefit of everybody, I talked about only 2% finding worksheets and materials being useful, but Emma talked about training and resources being really, really valuable. And I think, Emma, you can talk about this in a second maybe as well, but I think the distinction is those sort of activity sheets, or, just sort of packs of craft and those sorts of things, those sorts of resources, what I was talking about, that seem to be less beneficial. But I think what is really beneficial is things that help faith conversations in the home, things that perhaps start off easy opportunities to talk about God, those sorts of things. Would that be correct, Emma? Is that what?
Yeah, I actually just got up my my sheet after that of all my different codes from the research, and so what we've kind of, the training on resources that I highlighted was specifically around faith at home, because that's something, although we didn't explicitly say, was basically a big part of the research. But people said things like thoughts on discipleship, equipping parents to feel confident talking about Jesus, like ways to encourage conversations, that kind of thing. So it was a little bit more, and as I say, things like retreats and courses and book clubs, and like a bit more kind of relational resourcing, as opposed to here's a word search or a colouring sheet, if that makes sense. I think that's kind of where we were going with it.
It's just really important, kind of for that point, is that often we give our kids things at the end of church, so there's to go and fill in. Actually talking through the parents to what you've given them and why you've given them, what the purpose of it is, helps them to frame that resource. It isn't just a colouring in sheet, but actually to have a conversation and to take this forward. So that, again, springboarding idea, and to really unpack it with the parent too.
That's good. Yeah, that's really helpful. Great. Sammy, have we got anything else coming up in the Slido? Or are we... Oh, you're on mute. Sorry, Sammy.
Because I'm working off two devices.
You're doing amazing.
So one off Slido is, and I'm guessing this is somebody who's in the position of wanting to distill this evening and take it back maybe to their volunteers or to their leadership team. But what they're saying is, if we were to distill this evening into the headlines, what's new? What are those nuggets that we want to put out and say, this is really new and distinctive about what this research is telling us?
Who'd like to answer that question? Shall I answer? From my perspective, I think it's this sense that we need to be listening more to families, and I every church leader that I ever speak to wants to listen to families, wants to listen to people, wants to intentionally include and involve people, and particularly families. And so I don't think it's the fact that it's sort of, oh, you know, these naughty people aren't doing this. I don't think it's that at all. I think it's the sense that we perhaps assume that what we're doing in our churches is helpful and beneficial to families. But it's kind of perhaps going under the radar, and we're perhaps not quite so aware and not noticing. So I think what this research is showing is that the need to be more intentional about this. So all these things we've talked about valuing and including and affirming, and very much that working together. One setting that we've done interviews alongside some of these, and one setting was telling, what it was a parent actually, sorry, was saying to me that someone in their church had said to them, well, you don't need to worry about your child's faith at all, because we've got it covered. And the parent said, but my child goes to church, you know, 1 hour a week, not even every week. If I kind of think that that's my child's faith covered, then, you know, it's a bit of a worry. And so I think it's that sense that's been really shown in this research, that parents and churches alike want that partnership together. And so how can we explore that in contexts, you know, to tailor it according to our own contexts and needs and so on. I don't know if anybody else wanted to talk about that at all.
I think it's
go on, Andy.
I was going back to a biblical idea that actually this is what we're called to do biblically as families. But what's happened is we've become very good at children's work over the last number of years. We've almost limited parents' role. But in the last 2 years, the pandemic has shown us the importance of actually being holistic in how we do this thing. So it is about families rather than just a professional doing it for our kids.
Yeah, definitely. I was just going to say that. And the other thing I think that's come out of it, isn't it, is that families want partnership, they want relationship, they want connection, not programs, not things that we can just put on for their kids. They actually want us to listen and to find out what it is that they need, and to form those connections and relationships.
I think maybe too, it's about thinking about the next steps. You know, the pandemic was awful in all sorts of ways, but an amazing thing it did is so many families thought about faith at home and nurturing their children's spiritual faith in a way that they hadn't before. You know, it really, there is no church now, church isn't happening, really woke up parents and carers and churches alike to say, hey, what does this look like in the home? And I think that the thing that really stands out to me from the research is that's a great opportunity. Let's not lose that. Families have, whether or not they wanted to, they found ways to make things work. And some of it was great, some of it was awful, but they have learned a lot through this time. And so let's listen both sides, let's share ideas. You know, there's been lots of chat post lockdown, you know, will things go back to the way they were, or how can we make it look normal again? Or we can't, everything's changed. But I think some of that is really, really good and really exciting. Yeah, and just how can we take hold of that? And picking up on the question on kind of the resourcing, you know, we're now not at stage, I don't think many churches are sending activities and worksheets and stuff now, but there are churches who are really saying, okay, how can we equip parents in the everyday? How can we give them tools and skills and confidence to really go at this and build on what they've already done? And I think that's really exciting. So yeah, let's go with it.
Right. There's a question in the chat there that I think we've missed about exploring mentoring. Does anybody know any packages for training adults to be mentors to youth? I don't. Do any of you guys?
CPAS used to do a Growing Young Leaders course and still do. The amazing Ruth Hassel wrote it. I know she's not with CPAS anymore, but I have used that material and therefore I can vouch for it. I know that other churches have adapted packages they've run for adults suitable for children. It kind of depends on what level you're going in with mentoring, but certainly I can signpost Growing Young Leaders by CPAS as a valuable resource.
Thanks, Sammy. And then there's another question further back. Where could we access Mark Griffiths? Or has somebody answered that? Mentions about the extended family. There we are. Super. Thanks, Sammy, for sharing that at CPS. Great.
There's a
we'll
couple
put-
more questions on Slido as well, Sarah. I don't know.
Oh,
whether-
brilliant. Are you able to read them out?
Yeah, so there's a couple basically on how do we listen with in big churches. Basically, how can we listen big? It feels very daunting, which, yeah, how do you do it with a big context? I don't know whether you've got any wisdom, Sammy. Oh, you're on mute.
There we go. I was in a big resource church. We would get over 500 people through our doors on a Sunday. So that's why I did sampling. So what I did was I categorized all my families that came with children. So I used Sunday school registers. I then sampled roads, streets in the parish around. But for each street and the demographic, the data that it showed, I would ask the question, who is this like in my church? And then you ask the question, okay, who am I missing? Okay, from my church, who am I missing that's not represented? Because we were a bit of a hub church. We didn't just represent the local streets around, but people travelled in. But yeah, in terms of size, you just have to scale it down and you just have to do representative samples.
Thanks, Sammy. That's great. Somebody sent me a message as well saying, would it be beneficial to let the wider church know what the children and young people are covering in their groups? And I think this was kind of Andy's thinking earlier in terms of if sheets are going home with activities on, you know, to actually say to parents and families, you know, this is what we've been doing. You could talk about this, you know, perhaps add a little note on to say that, you know, you could talk with your child about this week and that kind of thing. That'd be really, really beneficial. Is there one more thing in Slido, Emma or Sammy, or are we there now?
Yeah, there was one about how do we help children who may attend after school clubs, Sunday school, but where parents aren't of faith.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I mean, all I would say on that is that I don't have loads to say, but all I would say is that the Talking Jesus stuff is a good reminder that, like, that it's not, we don't negate that. We're not saying that that's not important. And like, clearly children can come to faith in that context. So, but yeah, I don't know whether Anna has any thoughts on parents in that context where parents aren't of faith, but yeah, I guess this research didn't really, we were predominantly thinking about home, and it doesn't come, the school doesn't come up too much because a lot of it was lockdown, so school wasn't really school in the same way. So I guess that's, parents didn't really talk about it particularly.
I think you're right, we did focus on families that work in church for this, but it's a really valid point. But I think again, it's talking, isn't it? It's, you know, listening and being sensitive, you know, and having those conversations. Actually, you know, even parents who don't come to church are sometimes quite happy to talk about these sorts of things, and we shouldn't assume that they're not. So so I think talking. Anna, were you going to say something on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say it really depends on the context and where your church is. But I was struck by what Sammy was saying about what's in the supermarket aisle, what's coming up. And lots of those parents, even if they just drop off for after school club or for church, might come to a service or an event or a family barbecue or at Christmas and Easter or the summer or something at the end of a holiday club. And something that we found really valuable is to give parents and children a side-by-side experience that they can replicate at home. So like everyone's been talking about, really clear framing, this is what's going to happen. No one needs to feel silly or like they don't know what's going on. But, you know, say you're talking about, I don't know, God giving us peace. You know, you can explain what's happening and then say, okay, we are going to stick some music on, and for 1 minute, just get comfy, lie on the floor, and we're just going to ask God to bring peace, or, you know, whatever your church, your tradition is. But then give them a next step to say, hey, if you want to do this at home, God's the same everywhere, and it doesn't have to be this specific piece of music. So that you've modeled something, you've said to them, okay, here's a way that it could look. And for a parent who's interested and exploring faith, that might give them the confidence to try it at home. The other thing I was just going to say is it doesn't have to be the parent or carer who is the person modeling relationship with Jesus. You know, even for Christian children, it's actually really important that it's not just their parents. It's, you know, lots of people in the church and wider friends and family. So the people who are leading that after school club and making the coffee and welcoming them on the door, or who see them at the school gates and stuff, they can all be part of creating windows, sharing a little bit of what their relationship looks like, framing things, pointing stuff out, sharing stories. We've done a project recently with Parenting for Faith on nurturing spirituality in under threes, and particularly looking at toddler groups and people bringing babies and toddlers for infant baptism or dedication, christening, Thanksgiving, and whatever your tradition is. And even people who haven't been in church before very often have a sense of there is something greater, I'd like to know more, I feel a bit embarrassed or a bit awkward that I don't. And if we can come alongside them and say, that is brilliant, we agree with you that your child is special and important, and we'd love to journey with you. They're very, very open to talking about it. And we've developed all our resources to assume kind of no Christian background or jargon. But I think sometimes we can accidentally make it feel a bit like, well, you've got to know the right answers and tick the right boxes in order to come in, and then we'll talk to you about it. But how can we find what we agree with them on and really come alongside them, listen with, as Sammy said, and take it from there and take some next steps. So I don't know, a few ideas there.
Sarah, can I say 3 things really quickly?
Mm.
One would be, if you've got lots of children who you know are not from Christian families, then think about your touch points with them and be really intentional about your messaging so that you are embedding and kind of linking and building on the same message. Secondly, when picking up on what Anna said and going back to the data, this eat, work, sleep, repeat, families are looking for quality experiences, as Anna said, that they can do side by side. So when you're thinking of outreach events, create things that look familiar and safe for parents. It might be a cafe space somewhere, or, you know, I did a swimming activity, I did a soft play thing. So things that look familiar to what they take their children to anyway, and recruit volunteers who are just there to talk to parents. They're not running anything, but they are just there to get side by side with parents and talk to them. Holiday clubs where you have a cafe space during the school holidays, brilliant space. And the last thing, just be encouraged. So yes, growing up in a Christian family is the primary way that people say they come to faith. But there's a statistician called Peter Brearley who works for the Church of England. And what he's found is that the majority of people aged 30 plus who are returning to church of any denomination had some link, so a seed planted in them as a child. So even when you are working with children who are not from a Christian family, that is a really precious kingdom seed that God often is growing and flourishing in its own time.
Great, thanks, Emmy. I think Rachel was going to say something as well.
All I was going to say is when we did some research called Talking Toddlers that some of us have worked and collaborated on as well, and that just showed that over 50% of parents who, for example, bring their children along to something that is toddler friendly at a church begin to ask questions of faith for themselves. So it's if you've got those groups where it's just the children, next step is how could we maybe have the children with the parents. And often children of non-Christian parents, I know we find here at our church, really love to do something with their children rather than necessarily have their children removed from them. They're almost better at doing faith and children together because they feel a bit strange that their children have been taken away. So the things like more like the Messy Church model, where they're actually learning, you can see they're learning at the same time. Just they're having the conversations with you as well as the children are. So I think, and particularly it's that they are asking questions themselves, which is really exciting.
Great, super, fantastic. Well, anybody bursting to say anything else before we finish off? I think we've covered so many things, so I think we'll leave it there. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thanks to the wonderful team of all the different organisations. It's been a real pleasure to do this together. So hopefully you found that helpful this evening, and keep in touch. And we'll be sending some things out in the next few days to you. So thank you so much for spending time with us this evening. Hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Nice to see you. Bye-bye.